You can tell a lot about a man by how he acts when no one's watching, and even more when everyone is. The voice came low and steady, just as the laughter echoed across the dusty roadside lot where Ethan Cole stood, hands still, eyes quiet, as if the noise around him belonged to a different world entirely. You really think anyone's hiring you looking like that? One man scoffed, leaning against a polished pickup that cost more than Ethan had earned in 2 years. Man, he's got that broken down toolbox like it's 1995. Another added, shaking his head. Ethan didn't answer, didn't defend, didn't argue. He simply picked up his worn canvas bag, the zipper catching halfway like it always did, and turned away as the wind carried the smell of dry hay and motor oil through the late afternoon air, the sun hanging low over the open field stretching for miles beyond the gravel road, quiet and endless, like the kind of place where people forgot to look twice at anything that didn't shine. His boots pressed into the dirt with a steady rhythm, one step after another, not rushed, not heavy, just certain, like a man who had learned that dignity didn't need an audience to exist. Behind him, the laughter faded, swallowed by the hum of cicadas and the distant creak of an old wooden structure swaying against the breeze. And that's when he heard it, a sharp crack, followed by the hollow slam of loose boards colliding. Ethan stopped, just for a second, his eyes shifting toward the edge of a wide-open field where a weathered shed leaned slightly to one side, its roof sagging, its doors hanging uneven like they had given up trying to stand straight. And there, standing alone in the fading light, was a woman, sleeves rolled, hair loosely tied back, struggling to hold one side of the frame as another gust of wind pushed against it. "Hold on. Don't let it swing," she called out, her voice firm but edged with strain. Ethan didn't hesitate, didn't ask who she was or what she could offer. He just moved, crossing the dirt in long strides, dropping his bag beside the structure and catching the wooden beam just before it slipped. "I've got it," he said, calm, steady, like he had done this 100 times before. She glanced at him, surprised, measuring her. Eyes sharp but tired. "You sure?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied simply, adjusting his grip. "I'm sure." The wind eased for a moment, the boards settling into place with a low groan, and in that brief quiet, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, almost invisible pause, like the world itself was watching to see what would happen next. She stepped back slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, studying him in a way that wasn't judgmental, just curious. "Most people would have kept walking," she said. Ethan gave a faint shrug, eyes still on the frame he was steadying. "Most people aren't me." The corners of her lips almost moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. In the distance, beyond the rolling acres of land that stretched farther than the eye could measure, something else was moving too. Far off, barely noticeable, a glint of black against the horizon, but neither of them looked that way. Not yet, because in that moment, it was just a single dad, a broken shed, and a choice made without expecting anything in return, and no one there knew just how much that choice was about to change everything. "You always work for free? Or is today just my lucky day?" she asked, her voice lighter now, but still edged with something careful, something that measured more than just words. Ethan tightened the loose hinge with a slow turn of his wrench, the metal giving a soft click as it settled into place, and he shook his head once, not looking at her. "Depends on the job," he said. "And what kind of job is this?" she pressed, folding her arms as the wind lifted the edges of her shirt and carried the scent of dry grass across the field. Ethan paused for half a second, then continued working, steady and unhurried. "The kind that needs doing," he replied. She watched him more closely now, not the way people in town had, not dismissive, not amused, but attentive, like she was trying to understand something that did not fit into her usual expectations. "Most people would have asked what they get out of it," she said. "Most people have time to worry about that." Ethan answered quietly. The shed creaked again, softer this time, as he adjusted the frame and stepped back to check the alignment, his eyes scanning every edge with a kind of quiet precision that did not announce itself but could not be ignored. 2 more quick turns, one final push, and the door finally sat straight. Not perfect, but solid enough to stand against the wind. He wiped his hands on a cloth from his pocket, the fabric worn thin from years of use, and reached for his bag as if the job had already ended in his mind. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "At least let me pay you." Ethan glanced at her briefly, just a flicker of eye contact, before he looked away again. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "That is not how this works," she replied, a hint of insistence slipping through. "Maybe not where you are from," Ethan said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "But around here, sometimes it is." The words hung in the air for a moment, carried by the fading light as the sky shifted into deeper shades of amber and blue, and for the first time, she did not respond right away. Instead, she studied him again, more quietly now, noticing the small things, the calluses on his hands, the careful way he packed his tools, the absence of any expectation in the way he stood. "You have a family?" she asked suddenly. Ethan nodded once. "A daughter," he said. "She is 8. Something in her expression softened at that, almost imperceptibly, like a memory brushing against the surface. "You fix things for a living?" she continued. Ethan gave a small shrug. "I try to," he said. She exhaled slowly, looking past him for a moment at the open land stretching far beyond the shed, acres upon acres of quiet earth fading into the horizon, then back at him. "You are not like the others around here," she said. Ethan adjusted the strap on his shoulder, his voice calm. "Unchanged, neither are you." That stopped her, just for a second, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she had not expected to be seen so clearly. The wind picked up again, brushing against the repaired door, but this time it held, steady, grounded, and somewhere far off. That faint glint from earlier had grown just a little closer, still distant, still silent, but no longer invisible. She followed his gaze for a brief moment, then looked back at him, a quiet question forming that she did not ask. Ethan, however, had already turned, taking a few steps back toward the road, his figure outlined against the fading light, leaving behind a structure that would stand a little longer than it would have without him. And as he walked away, without asking for anything, without looking back, she realized something that did not fit neatly into her world of transactions and control. Some people did not help because they needed something. They helped because it was who they were, and that kind of quiet strength was far more rare than anything money could buy. "You did not even ask her name," a small voice said later that evening, soft but certain, as Ethan stepped into the modest kitchen of his home, the warm glow of a single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. He set his bag down by the door, glancing toward the table where his daughter sat with a workbook open, her pencil resting midair as she looked up at him with curious eyes. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Ethan nodded once, slipping off his boots. "It will hold," he said. She tilted her head slightly, studying him the same way someone much older might. "And she did not pay you?" Ethan gave a faint smile, moving to the sink and washing the dust from his hands as the water ran steady and clear. "Not everything has to be about that," he replied. "But we need money," she said simply, not complaining, just stating a truth she had learned too early. Ethan paused for a moment, the sound of the faucet filling the silence, then turned it off and reached for a towel, drying his hands slowly. "We need a lot of things," he said, his voice calm, grounded, "but we do not trade who we are to get them." She nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting him anyway, the way children do when they feel something deeper than words. Outside, the night settled over the land, stretching across miles of quiet fields, the air cooling as the last light faded beyond the horizon, and far in the distance, where the road curved past the edge of that same weathered shed, headlights appeared, not one set, but several, moving in a slow, deliberate line that did not belong to chance or coincidence. Back inside, Ethan moved through the small space with practiced ease, heating a simple meal, the scent of something warm and familiar filling the room, grounding it in a kind of quiet comfort that money could not replicate. "Will you go back tomorrow?" his daughter asked, setting her pencil down. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged lightly. "If she still needs help," he said. "Most people would charge extra the second time," she added. Ethan let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a quiet laugh. "Most people are keeping score," he said. "And you are not?" she asked. He shook his head once, setting a plate in front of her. "No," he answered. Because the moment you start counting, you stop seeing what really matters. She looked down at the plate, then back at him, something thoughtful settling in her expression, like a seed planted that would take time to grow. Miles away, the line of vehicles slowed as they approached the edge of the field, engines low, controlled, the kind of movement that carried purpose without noise, and one by one, they came to a stop just beyond the shed, their presence almost surreal against the quiet land. A door opened, then another, silhouettes stepping out into the cool night air, their posture alert but restrained, waiting, watching, and in the center of it all, the same woman stood again, no longer struggling with broken wood or shifting beams, but still looking in the direction Ethan had walked away, her expression unreadable, as if she was measuring something far more valuable than land or numbers. Back in his small home, Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from his daughter, the two of them sharing a quiet moment that felt simple on the surface but carried a weight that the world outside would not understand. "You think she will remember you?" his daughter asked softly. Ethan picked up his fork, his voice steady. "Unchanged. That is not why I helped her." The room fell into a gentle silence, filled only by the soft clink of utensils and the steady rhythm of a life built on something deeper than recognition. And somewhere beyond the miles of open land, decisions were already being made, plans quietly unfolding, all set into motion by a man who had walked away without asking for anything at all. People like him do not stay invisible for long. A voice said quietly in the darkness, firm and controlled, as the line of black vehicles sat motionless along the edge of the field, their engines now silent, their presence heavy against the open land. One man stepped forward, holding a tablet that cast a faint glow against his face. "We ran a quick background," he continued, glancing toward the woman standing a few feet away, her posture composed, her eyes still fixed in the direction Ethan had disappeared hours earlier. "Name is Ethan Cole, local, no outstanding debts, no criminal record, just quiet." She did not respond immediately, her gaze steady, thoughtful, as if she was replaying something far more important than a report. "And the land?" she asked. "All clear," the man replied. "Every acre surrounding this structure belongs to your holdings, Ms. Whitmore." The title landed softly in the air, but it carried weight, the kind that usually shifted conversations instantly, except this time, it did not. "Clara." Whitmore lowered her eyes briefly, looking at the repaired hinge on the shed door, running her fingers lightly along the wood where Ethan's hands had steadied it, as if the small fix held more meaning than the thousands of acres stretching beyond it. "He did not ask for anything?" she asked. "No, ma'am," the man answered. "Did not even take a payment offer." A faint exhale escaped her, almost like a quiet acknowledgement rather than surprise. "Interesting," she said softly. The others waited, their silence disciplined, their attention fixed on her next word, because in their world, decisions came fast and rarely without purpose. But Clara did not rush. She stepped back slightly, letting her eyes sweep across the land, the long rows of untouched fields disappearing into the horizon, the same land that people fought over, negotiated, measured, valued in numbers too large to comprehend. And yet earlier that day, one man had stood here and seen none of that, only a broken structure that needed fixing. "Find out where he works," she said finally. "Already did," the man replied, tapping the screen. "Small repair jobs, seasonal work, nothing consistent." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing the information, but her expression remained unchanged, unreadable in the dim light. "And his family?" she asked. "One daughter, 8 years old," the man said. Something shifted then, subtle, almost invisible, but real, like a quiet door opening somewhere deep within her. She turned slightly, looking once more toward the road where Ethan had walked away without hesitation, without expectation, and for the first time, there was something different in her gaze, not curiosity alone, but respect. "We do not approach him yet," she said. "Not yet?" the man echoed, surprised. Clara shook her head gently, her voice calm but certain. "No, because the moment people know who you are, they stop showing you who they are." The wind moved again, brushing against the fields, carrying a cool edge that hinted at the coming night, and the shed door, newly aligned, held firm, no longer swaying under pressure. Let him come back, she added, if he chooses to. The man nodded, understanding the instruction even if he did not fully grasp the reason behind it. Orders were orders, but this one felt different, less about control, more about observation. Clara turned away from the shed, walking toward the waiting vehicles, her steps measured, deliberate, but before she reached the door, she paused for just a moment, glancing back one last time at the quiet structure standing alone in the vast field. Earlier, it had been nothing more than a broken piece of wood and nails, something easily overlooked, easily replaced, but now, it carried a different kind of value, one that could not be calculated or owned. And as she stepped into the car, the door closing with a soft, final sound, one thing had already become clear in a way no report could capture. The man who fixed her shed without asking for anything had just become the one person she could not ignore. "You came back," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably certain. As the morning sun stretched across the fields in long golden lines and Ethan stepped into view once more, his boots pressing into the same dirt path, his canvas bag resting against his shoulder like it belonged there. He paused for just a moment when he saw her already standing beside the shed, as if she had been there longer than necessary, waiting without appearing to wait. "You said it might need more work," Ethan replied, simply setting his bag down and walking toward the structure, his eyes scanning the wood, the hinges, the frame, not her. "Most people would not return without being asked," she said, watching him closely. "Most people did not start the job," he answered, crouching slightly to check the lower beam, pressing against it with steady hands. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of soil and open land, and for a brief moment, everything felt still, untouched by the noise of the outside world. "You do realize this is not your responsibility," she continued. Ethan gave a small shrug, tightening a loose bolt. "Maybe not," he said, "but it matters to someone." She crossed her arms lightly, studying him again, this time with less distance, more intention. "And that is enough for you?" she asked. Ethan looked up at her then, just for a second, his expression calm, grounded. "It usually is." She held his gaze a fraction longer than before, as if weighing something unseen, then glanced away toward the far stretch of land, where the horizon blurred into soft morning haze. "You ever think about owning something like this?" she asked, gesturing subtly to the endless acres surrounding them. Ethan followed her gaze briefly, then returned to his work. "Land does not change who you are," he said, "but it changes what you can do," she replied. Ethan tightened the last bolt and stood, brushing the dust from his hands. "What you do matters more than what you have," he said quietly. The words settled between them, not heavy, but firm, like something that did not need to be argued. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound the faint rustle of wind moving through the distant grass, and somewhere beyond the tree line, unseen but present, a vehicle idled quietly, its presence hidden but deliberate. "You are different," she said finally. Ethan gave a faint, almost amused exhale. "You said that yesterday." "I meant it differently today," she replied. He did not respond to that, instead reaching for his bag, signaling that his part was done once again. "You always leave this quickly?" she asked, a slight edge of curiosity slipping through. "I stay long enough," Ethan said. She stepped forward just a little, her voice softer now, more direct. "What if I asked you to stay longer?" Ethan paused, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge the question. "Then I would ask why," he said. She held that moment, considering, measuring, then gave a small nod as if arriving at a quiet decision. "Because I would like to understand you," she said. Ethan stood still for a second, the wind catching lightly against his jacket. Then he turned back just enough to meet her eyes again. Calm, steady, unchanged. "There is not much to understand," he said. She shook her head slightly, almost to herself. "I think there is more than you realize." In the distance, the faint outline of a parked vehicle remained motionless, watching, waiting, but neither of them acknowledged it. Not yet. Instead, they stood there in the open field, two people from completely different worlds, connected not by status or expectation, but by something quieter, something far less obvious. And for the first time, it was not just her observing him. It was him beginning to notice that something about her did not quite match the story she was telling. You ever notice how the quiet ones see the things no one else does? Ethan said without looking at her, his voice low, and even as he adjusted a loose plank along the side of the shed, his hands moving with the same steady rhythm as before. Clara did not answer right away, but something in her posture shifted, subtle but real, like she had just been caught thinking something she had not meant to show. "What do you think I am seeing?" she asked, her tone controlled, but softer than before. Ethan paused, pressing the wood into place, then stepped back slightly, wiping his hands on his cloth. "You keep looking past the land," he said. "Most people look at acres and see numbers, fences, ownership. You look at it like it is something else." She held his words for a moment, her eyes drifting across the open field where the morning light now stretched farther, revealing more of the quiet expanse. "And what do you see?" she asked. Ethan followed her gaze briefly, then shook his head once. "I see work," he said simply, "and people who forget why they started it." The wind brushed lightly through the grass, carrying a soft whisper that filled the silence between them, and somewhere beyond the distant ridge, a figure shifted near the parked vehicle, watching, waiting, but still keeping their distance. Clara turned back to him, studying his face more closely now, not just curious, but searching, as if trying to understand how someone could stand in the middle of something so vast and see so little of what most would chase. "You could have asked for a job," she said. "Someone like you. You would not have been turned away if you asked the right person." Ethan let out a faint breath, almost a quiet laugh. "I did ask," he said. "Yesterday, remember?" She tilted her head slightly, and he picked up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. "Turns out I was not the right kind of person." She narrowed her eyes just a little, something sharper flickering beneath her calm. "That depends on who is doing the deciding." Ethan met her gaze for a brief second, his expression unchanged. "Exactly." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, the kind that did not need to be repeated to be understood. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air between them holding that quiet tension that was not uncomfortable, just honest. "Come back tomorrow," she said suddenly. Ethan paused mid-step, not turning fully. "Why?" he asked. Clara hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then answered, "Because I think this place could use someone who sees it the way you do." Ethan considered that, his eyes scanning the shed, the field, the horizon, then returning to her. "Places do not change," he said. "People do." She gave a small nod, almost to herself. "Then maybe it is time this one does." In the distance, the faint hum of an engine rose and fell again, controlled, patient, like a presence that understood timing better than urgency. Ethan adjusted his grip on the strap, his voice calm, steady as ever. "I will think about it," he said. Clara watched him for a moment longer, then stepped back, giving him space without stepping away completely. "You do that," she replied. He turned and walked toward the road once more, his figure moving against the wide-open backdrop of land that seemed endless, untouched, and yet quietly shifting in ways that could not be seen. And as he disappeared into the distance again, Clara remained where she stood, her eyes following the path he had taken, not because she needed something from him, but because for the first time in a long time, she had found something she could not control, and that made it matter even more. Funny thing about respect. A sharp voice cut through the morning air, breaking the quiet before Ethan could even reach the shed. "It usually has to be earned, not handed out to anyone with a toolbox." Ethan stopped mid-step, his gaze shifting slightly toward the source, where a man in a pressed button-down shirt and polished boots stood near a sleek truck, arms crossed, posture stiff with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. "You the one fixing things around here," the man continued, his tone carrying just enough edge to draw attention without raising his voice. Ethan did not answer immediately, his eyes briefly scanning the scene. Clara standing a few feet away, her expression unreadable, watching, waiting. "I help when something needs it," Ethan said finally, calm, steady. The man let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head. "That is not how this works," he said. "This land is not some open charity project, and people do not just walk in and start acting like they belong." Ethan adjusted the strap on his shoulder slightly, his voice unchanged. "I did not say I belonged. Then maybe you should remember that, the man replied, stepping a little closer, not aggressive, but deliberate, the kind of movement meant to establish space. Clara remained silent, her eyes moving between them, not intervening, not yet. You know who you are talking to? The man added, glancing briefly toward her as if expecting validation. Ethan followed that glance for a moment, then looked back at him. Someone who thinks it matters, he said. The words landed clean, without force, but they carried enough weight to shift the air just slightly. The man's expression tightened, not anger, but irritation, the kind that came from not getting the reaction he expected. You think you are doing her a favor, he said. Fixing a few boards does not make you valuable here. Ethan shook his head once. I did not come here to be valuable, he said. I came here because something was broken. A brief silence followed, stretched thin by the tension that had quietly formed, the wind brushing across the field, the shed standing firm behind them as if it had already made its point. You should leave, the man said, his voice lower now, more controlled. Before you start thinking this is something it is not. Ethan looked past him for a moment, toward the open land, then back again. I never thought it was anything, he said. Clara stepped forward. Then, just one step, but enough to shift the balance of the moment, her voice calm, precise. That will be enough, Daniel. The man straightened slightly, his attention snapping back to her. I was just making sure things are handled properly, he said. Clara held his gaze, steady, unyielding. They are. The exchange was brief, but it carried a finality that did not need to be repeated. Daniel nodded once, stepping back, though the tension in his posture remained, his eyes flicking once more toward Ethan before turning away. The air settled again, but not quite the same as before. Something had shifted, something deeper than a simple disagreement. Ethan picked up his bag again, his movements unhurried, unaffected, as if the moment had passed without leaving a mark. You did not have to do that, he said quietly, not looking at Clara. Yes, I did, she replied. Ethan glanced at her briefly. Why? He asked. Clara held his gaze, her voice softer now, but certain. Because respect is not something you demand, she said. It is something you recognize when you see it. Ethan considered that for a moment, then gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Behind them, the vast field stretched on, unchanged on the surface, but something beneath it had begun to move, something that could not be seen in acres or measured in value. And as the silence returned, deeper this time, more intentional, one truth had quietly taken its place in the space between them. Not everyone who stands quietly is small, and not everyone who speaks loudly understands what matters. You still think I do not belong here? Ethan asked quietly the next morning, his voice steady but carrying something deeper now, not defensive, not confrontational, just honest, as he stepped back from the shed and looked toward Clara, who stood a few feet away with her arms loosely crossed, the early sunlight catching the edges of her hair. She did not answer right away, her eyes shifting briefly toward the far end of the field where Daniel's truck was no longer parked. Then back to Ethan. I think you do not see where you are standing, she said. Ethan let out a faint breath, glancing around at the endless stretch of land, the clean lines of fencing in the distance, the quiet order that had begun to reveal itself more clearly with each passing day. It is just land, he replied. Clara shook her head slightly, a small, almost amused exhale escaping her. It has never been just land. Before Ethan could respond, the low hum of engines rolled in from the distance, subtle at first, then unmistakable, a line of black vehicles moving slowly along the dirt road, their presence controlled, deliberate, nothing like the casual traffic of a rural road. Ethan turned his head slightly, watching as they approached, his expression calm but observant. You expecting company? He asked. Clara did not look surprised, but she did not answer immediately either, her posture straightening just enough to signal a shift, something unspoken but undeniable. The vehicles came to a stop in a clean line along the edge of the field, doors opening almost in unison, several individuals stepping out, their movements coordinated, respectful. And then one man approached, stopping a few feet behind Clara. Ms. Whitmore, he said clearly, his tone professional, carrying just enough volume to reach Ethan without raising it. The name settled into the air like a quiet echo, and for the first time since they had met, the silence that followed was not soft. It was complete. Ethan did not move, did not react outwardly, but something behind his eyes shifted, not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. Clara turned slightly, acknowledging the man with a small nod, then looked back at Ethan, her expression calm, but no longer hiding anything. "I was going to tell you," she said. Ethan gave a small nod, as if he had expected that sentence, even if he had not expected the truth behind it. "You own all this," he said, not as a question, but as a quiet statement. Clara held his gaze. Yes, the wind moved through the field again, but this time it carried a different weight, the kind that comes when truth replaces assumption. One of the men stepped forward slightly, holding a tablet, ready to speak, but Clara raised her hand just enough to stop him, her attention still on Ethan. "Everything you see," she added, gesturing lightly toward the horizon. "Every acre." Ethan looked out across the land once more, the scale of it no longer abstract, no longer distant, but real, measured in miles instead of guesses. He let the silence sit for a moment, then looked back at her, his voice unchanged. "That does not change what needed fixing." The words landed without hesitation, without adjustment, exactly as he had spoken every word before. A few of the men behind Clara exchanged brief glances, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Clara did not look away, her eyes steady, something deeper now, something that had nothing to do with ownership or control. "No," she said softly, "it does not." Another pause followed, longer this time, the kind that stretches just enough to let everyone present understand that something had shifted in a way that could not be reversed. Ethan adjusted the strap on his shoulder slightly, his posture unchanged, grounded, unaffected by the presence of wealth, status, or expectation. "Then I guess nothing really changed," he said. And in that moment, surrounded by acres of land, by people who measured value in numbers and influence, by a truth that would have changed how most would stand, speak, or think, the only thing that remained exactly the same was him. So what happens now? The question came not from Clara, not from the men behind her, but from one of the younger staff members standing near the vehicles, his voice uncertain, almost hesitant, as if he was unsure which version of the moment he was supposed to respond to. The field fell quiet again, the kind of silence that did not demand attention but commanded it anyway, stretching across every acre, every person, every unspoken realization settling into place. Clara did not turn to answer him, her eyes still on Ethan, steady, searching, as if the answer to that question did not belong to her alone. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, his gaze moving once more across the land, then back to her, his voice calm, unchanged. "Nothing has to happen," he said. The simplicity of it landed heavier than anything else that had been said, cutting clean through expectation, through assumption, through the invisible structure of power that usually dictated moments like this. One of the men stepped forward slightly, clearing his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, we have the meeting in 40 minutes, he said, his tone respectful but firm. Clara gave a small nod without looking away, acknowledging the reminder without breaking the moment. "You could stay," she said then, her voice softer now. "Not an order, not a transaction, but an offer." Ethan tilted his head slightly, considering. "Stay and do what?" he asked. "Help rebuild this place," she replied, gesturing toward the shed, the fields, the structures barely visible in the distance. "The right way." Ethan glanced at the shed behind him, the simple repairs he had made holding firm, then back at her. "It is already being rebuilt," he said. Clara shook her head gently, a faint smile touching her expression for the first time. Not polished, not practiced, but real. "Not the way you see it." A brief silence followed, the wind brushing through the field, the sound soft but constant, like a reminder that some things moved forward whether people noticed or not. Ethan looked down for a moment, then back up, meeting her gaze fully now, not as a worker, not as an outsider, but as someone standing on equal ground without needing to claim it. "I do not work for titles," he said. Clara nodded. "I know. And I do not stay where I have to be someone else," he added. "You would not have to," she replied. Another pause, longer this time. stretching just enough to let the truth settle between them. Ethan adjusted the strap on his shoulder again. A familiar motion, grounding, consistent. "Then maybe I come back," he said. Clara's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, but something close to relief. "Maybe," she echoed. Ethan gave a small nod. "If it still needs fixing." A faint breath escaped her, almost a quiet laugh, but softer, more contained. "It will," she said. Behind her, the men stood still, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain, because the moment had already decided itself in a way they could not influence. Ethan turned then, taking a few steps toward the road, the same path he had walked before, unchanged, unhurried, his figure moving steadily against the backdrop of land that now held a different meaning, not because it belonged to someone powerful, but because it had been seen differently by someone who did not need it. Clara watched him go, not calling him back, not adding conditions, just standing there as the distance between them grew, her eyes steady, thoughtful, and as the engines behind her slowly came to life, as the structured world she belonged to prepared to move forward again, one truth remained, quiet but undeniable, settling into the space where expectations once stood. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk away the same way they arrived, with nothing to prove, nothing to claim, and everything that matters already intact.